So let's just focus on our breath for a few minutes, 2 or 3, and I think you know what to do. Okay, so now let's generate bodhicitta motivation for this evening's session. Think, the purpose of my life is to lead all sentient beings from suffering to enlightenment. In order to do that, first I have to reach enlightenment myself. And my reaching enlightenment depends upon my completing the path to enlightenment through study, contemplation, and meditation, and achieving all the realizations on the path. So since this is the path out of samsara, and samsara is in the nature of suffering, I'm certain to meet a lot of sufferings and problems along the way. So I need technique to not just deal with the sufferings, but to transform them into the path, to transform problems into happiness. Therefore, I'm going to participate in this class looking at Lama Zopa Rinpoche's teachings on transforming problems into happiness, in order to reach enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So we were looking at Rinpoche's teachings in this book, Transforming Problems into Happiness. And, one thing is to develop the thought of liking problems, seeing them as desirable, not undesirable. And, in one way, getting rid of problems by labeling them as opportunities or happiness. So the last chapter we looked at was entitled, developing a different attitude to problems. So the next one is happiness and suffering are created by your mind. So just from the book, Buddhist teachings tell us that all of existence depends on the tip of the wish. All happiness and all suffering depend on our wish, our motivation. The most oppressive suffering of the hell realms and the highest happiness of the state of omniscient mind come from the mind. With few exceptions, all actions we perform with our body, speech, and mind out of worldly concern, that's concern only for our own happiness, in this life alone, are non-virtuous and thus result in suffering. All actions of the body, speech, and mind done with the wish that seeks happiness beyond this life, seeks the happiness of future lives, or seeks the happiness of all beings, are virtuous and cause our happiness. Through these actions, we can experience happiness in future lives as well as in this life. All actions of body, speech, and mind done with the wish to achieve liberation from the bondage of karma and the disturbing thoughts are virtuous and are themselves the cause of liberation. So delusion and karma. If we do actions aimed at transcending delusion and karma and escaping from cyclic existence, attaining nirvana or liberation, then those actions will become the cause of that. So, we usually talk about delusions, the 6 principal delusions, the 20 secondary delusions. Rinpoche more literally calls them disturbing negative minds. Tibetan is Nyun Mong. So disturbing negative minds. We can see that if we're angry, for example, our mind is clearly disturbed. Or, if we have strong attachment, also our mind is disturbed. It's not calm. It's kind of, roiling with anger or, aching with desire. So definitely it's disturbed. It's not a calm, clear mind. And negative, in that when we act under the influence of those negative minds, they leave imprints in our consciousness that, negative karma, imprints on our consciousness that ripen sooner or later into suffering. So since that's something we don't want, they're called negative. So disturbing negative minds or delusions. All actions of body, speech, and mind done with the wish to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings are not only virtuous, but are also the cause of enlightenment. Once you realize this, you perform positive actions all day and night, and all these actions become the cause to achieve the ultimate and peerless happiness of the state of enlightenment. So, we talked last time how these teachings on thought transformation, transforming not just suffering and problems, but any action that we do, whether it's eating, sleeping, talking, working, watching TV, whatever it is, we can transform that action with bodhicitta into the cause of enlightenment, and that's one of the three ways in which this perfect human rebirth is meaningful or useful. Useful to attain temporal goals, useful to attain ultimate goals, such as liberation, enlightenment, and useful every moment can be if we know how to apply the teachings on thought transformation. So Rinpoche also calls this bodhicitta mindfulness. Mindfulness is quite a hot topic these days, and the way it's often presented is, mindfulness wasn't invented by the Buddha or first taught by the Buddha. It has a long tradition in India from pre-Buddhist times, where Hindu yogis, Hindu meditators were able to attain single-pointed concentration also, and these higher, the different levels of absorption. Talked about it in the last series, I think. The meditative states in the form realm and the four formless absorptions. You remember those? Those are not, strictly speaking, only Buddhist teachings. They came from earlier Indian traditions, and they were states achieved by earlier meditators. But, because there weren't the teachings on emptiness, they were not able to use that perfect concentration in order to meditate on emptiness and therefore achieve liberation. So it wasn't useful in the sense of being a tool to attain these ultimate states. Anyway, so if we understand teachings on thought transformation, we can make every moment of our life meaningful and the cause of enlightenment. And we call this bodhicitta mindfulness. So mindfulness is, a fancy word for memory, just remembering. So, when we're practicing, when we're meditating on the breath, that's kind of mindfulness. But, usually or often after a few seconds, we forget. We lose our mindfulness. We forget that we're supposed to be on the breath, and our mind goes to something more interesting, or something we forgot to do, or whatever. So, we have to learn to develop stronger, better memory to keep our, short-term memory on the object of meditation and not let it wander off. So bodhicitta mindfulness is being aware or remembering to use bodhicitta all the time, whatever we're doing, to transform every action, every moment of our life into the cause of enlightenment. So so that's a very important technique we need to practice. So then all our actions become the cause of enlightenment. So this is why the Buddha's teachings say that all of existence depends on the tip of a wish. Everything depends completely on the mind. Temporal and even ultimate happiness depend completely on your wish, on your own mind. Different results come from different types of wishes. All suffering arises from the misguided wish for your own temporal happiness in only this life. This kind of happiness seems to be happiness, but it's really only suffering. This is samsaric happiness, which cannot be found because it does not exist. However, from the wish to achieve liberation comes liberation. From the wish to achieve the omniscient enlightened mind comes the omniscient enlightened mind. Thus, samsaric suffering and ultimate happiness come completely from your own wish, from your own mind. If you closely examine your own experience, you'll see that happiness and suffering are dependent upon your mind, upon your interpretation of events and circumstances. Happiness and suffering do not come from outside, from others. All of your happiness and all of your suffering are created by you, by your own mind and motivation. So, although we should try to generate a bodhicitta motivation before doing any action, it's especially important when we're doing a Dharma action like, like tonight's class, for example. Now, I mentioned, I think another time, that in the morning when we get up, we should really, our first thought should be what we start at the beginning here, the purpose of my life, or we can even think that we were lucky not to have died during the night. We feel understanding that death is certain and the time of death is uncertain, and that in the previous night, so many sentient beings died, so many sentient beings went to sleep, went to bed the previous night, expecting to wake up in the morning, and they didn't. So many, every day, all around the world. So we can think how fortunate I am not to have died last night when so many others did. And there's, when I went to bed, there was no guarantee that I would wake up this morning in this life.
Hi, Nick.
Yeah.
I had a question about motivation for doing anything in the practice. So I was reading Words of My Perfect Teacher by Rinpoche, and he was telling a little anecdotal story about Nanda, who was a cousin of the Buddha.
Sorry, which Rinpoche?
Patrul.
Mm-hmm.
And he was telling a little anecdotal story about Nanda, who was a cousin of Shakyamuni Buddha, um, whose goal was to be reborn in the God realms because Buddha took him to the God realms to show him like beautiful women. And he's like, oh, do these women look more beautiful than his wife? He says yes. So his motivation turns to being reborn in the God realms, and then eventually later on in his practice, um, the Buddha, like after a couple of years, brings him to the hell realms and shows him someone being tortured, or he shows him an empty cauldron where someone's going to be tortured, and he says, "Oh, what's that?" He says, "Oh, well, that's where you're going to end up when your karma runs out in the God realms." So I guess I was just like kind of confused as you were saying, and I've read elsewhere, is like wanting happiness for future lives is seen as better than just wanting happiness for this life, but wouldn't it be, I don't know. It almost seems like wanting happiness for future lives that are in samsara would still be like negative karma. So I was kind of confused as to how one could aspire for happiness for later lives, but then also that anecdote of how Nanda would eventually be reborn in the hell realms because his karma would run out.
Right. So, rebirth in the upper realms, human or in the God realms, is a positive result, is a result of positive karma, is a result of good karma. Because relatively, within cyclic existence, where, it's relative existence or conventional existence, it's relatively happy compared to the intense suffering of the three lower realms. And so, there are people who can't get their mind around cyclic existence, sort of not being in cyclic existence, or like impossible to conceive of, liberation or enlightenment, some kind of disembodied existence. And there's still attachment to having a body. So for those people, the Buddha taught the path of the lower capable being, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche calls it, the low. Sometimes people call it the lower scope. So for people who understand that there's terrible suffering in the three lower realms, and all they want is not to be born there. So in the next life, so they can achieve that result by abandoning attachment to the happiness of this life and practicing morality and generosity and doing purification practices and so on, and create positive karma to be born in the upper realms as a human or a god. Also, in the when we achieve those higher meditative absorptions, like the in the form and the formless realm, there's, or even, as I said before, where we attain samadhi or perfect single-pointed concentration, the experience of single-pointed concentration is what Lama Zopa Rinpoche calls rapturous ecstasy. Remember, I'm always quoting that. I'm obsessed with the term rapturous ecstasy. Not just rapture, not just ecstasy, it's rapturous ecstasy. So, beyond any worldly happiness we can experience. And then with that, then experiencing, even as a human, but experiencing the absorptions of these higher levels of meditation, it's so blissful that it can be mistaken for actual liberation. and then by getting attached to that, we actually attach to an samsaric experience, and we don't get out of samsara. So whether it's in the desire God realm, or if it's one of these form or formless absorption God realms. Remember, there are 27 levels in the God realm. There are 6 desire realm levels of gods, and there are 17 form levels in the form realm, 17 levels of God there, and then 4 formless absorptions where they don't have a body, they just have the mental aggregates or mental skandhas. So if you're born there, it's a result of strong renunciation, strong meditation practice, pure morality, and an enormous accumulation of merit. But while you're there, you're not creating any more merit. You're just burning up the good karma that you've already created. So that's why the Buddha showed, was it Ananda or?
Ananda, yeah.
Yeah, it was. I thought it might be another disciple, maybe Ananda. Different lamas sometimes tell the same story different ways. That's why he showed him that after you're born in the God realms, you use up all your karma. There's only one, you don't have any more good karma. You have to be born in the lower realms because of all the negative karma that you failed to purify, and you just kind of, floated on top of for a while. But eventually you sink back into the lower realms when when your life comes, when the karma to experience that upper realm life is exhausted, and and all that's left is negative throwing karma to come up at the end of the life, at the end of that particular life. So so that's why we're always taught, this is, look, there are upper realms, there are God realms, there's the human realm, and these realms, these rebirths are the result of a cause, and this is the cause. Morality, practicing concentration, and praying to be born, praying not to be born in the lower realms.
Mm-hmm.
But for exactly that reason, that it's still in cyclic existence, it's still in prison. It's like I was in prison once, well, twice actually, for the same crime, in Delhi. Anyone heard of Charles Sabraj? No? The bikini killer? He didn't kill bikinis, he killed people wearing bikinis. The serpent? I think it's been shown in England. I think it's called The Serpent. There's a couple of books written about him, Charles Sabraj. He was French Vietnamese. So his father was Indian living in Vietnam, and I guess his mother was Vietnamese. And I can't remember when the French were kicked out of Vietnam. Was it in the late 50s or in the 60s? Anyway, I guess the French were big in Southeast Asia for a while, at least in, I was in Laos in 72, in Vientiane, and there was a lot of French restaurants and French food there. It was quite nice, actually. So he was a psychopathic con man, and he used to prey on so-called hippies and drug them and sometimes kill them and steal their money and passports and things. So if you look up Charles Sobraj, Sobhraj, Sobraj, you look him up in Wikipedia somewhere. Anyway, there was just a series shown on British TV, I think a 6 or 8 part series about his life and crimes. And so one book was called The Life and Crimes of Charles Sobraj. I think it was written by Richard Neville, Australian writer. And another one was called Serpentine. And this series is called The Serpent. I think it's coming to Netflix maybe this month. So I think he started off murdering some travelers. I mean, I don't know if they were hippies or what they were, but young travelers traveling in the East in the 70s. And one of the first people he killed was a woman, a girl, she was early 20s, 21, Teresa Knowlton. She was a student of the Lamas, Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. She'd been to Copan. She was at the 4th course in 73 and at the 6th course in 74. And in 75, I was traveling with the Lamas around the world on their 2nd world tour. I was their roadie. And I used to give a few talks and lead the meditations and book the tickets and carry the bags, One of the best times of my life, 24/7 with Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And for 9 months. And they gave their first Copan style Lam Rim course in California in about July of 75. And Teresa Knowlton was our driver. We was at a campgrounds at Lake Arrowhead near Los Angeles. And the students who put it on, some earlier Copan students and others put it on, had rented a house nearby, so where the Lamas and I stayed. And we had a driver, and Teresa Knowlton was our driver. And she asked Lama Yeshe if she could become a nun, and he gave her permission. So he said, come to Copan at the end of the year, end of 75, for the 8th course, and you can get ordained then. So I was just setting up publishing and stuff at Copan at that time, and we needed typewriters. So I bought a typewriter, good typewriters. So I bought a typewriter in California and I gave it to her to bring to Nepal when she came to get ordained. And then the course finished and we went to Indiana for another course, and then so then in October or November, whenever it was, she left California and she was traveling with another American student called John McKay, and they flew to Bangkok, and then from Bangkok they were going to Kathmandu. That was one of the best ways get to Nepal in those days on Thai International Airlines. There are Thai and Royal Nepal Airlines were the only mainly apart from Indian Airlines flying from India, they were the only other airlines going to Nepal, I think, at the time. So Thai Airlines was much better than Royal Nepal, as you might imagine. So so John went on to Nepal, Kathmandu, and she said, I'm going to go to the beach for a few days, and then I'll come on alone to Kathmandu. So she never showed up. And long story short, she was one of the people murdered by Charles Sobraj. I think one of the first ones and she was found near Pattaya Beach in a bikini, lying in shallow water. So she'd been drugged and drowned or something like that and robbed. So anyway, life went on and there were a few more courses. And then in 1977, Lama Yeshe sent me to New Delhi to start a meditation center, which was unusual at the time because most of the centers that were starting, like several centers started during that trip of 1975, and they started by the Lamas coming to a certain country or town, a city, and the students there saying, Lama, we want to start a center for you. And sometimes he gave permission, sometimes he said, well, let's wait and see, but the centers, the way most of the centers started was because students at the particular place wanted a center, and Lama would tell them, look, you can start a center, but it's your baby, you have to do the whole thing. We'll come from time to time and give teachings, him and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, but you have to raise the money, you have to do all the work on the ground, and be responsible for it. So it's your baby. So that's how most of them started. But so this time Lama called me into his room and said, it was in January in 77. He said, I think we need a center in Delhi. The Indian people have been extremely kind to the Tibetan people. They're kind in, giving us Buddhism. Buddha was Indian, and so there's just that kindness in generating the Dharma, and then when Buddhism began to sort of fade in India about 1,000 years ago, most of the teachings were transmitted to Tibet, and then they were developed and practiced and refined in Tibet, and kept very pure. And so when the Chinese finally took over Tibet, and so many Tibetans had to flee, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama and many other High Lamas, the Indians again were very kind to us in taking us in and giving us somewhere where we could reestablish our lives and the Tibetan culture and religion. We were able to bring with us pure Buddhism that had been preserved and developed over 1,000 years, and while it had largely disappeared from India. So there aren't that many Indian people practicing Buddhism, so we want to start a center to sort of start re-establishing Vajrayana Buddhism in India. And let's start by creating a meditation center in the capital. So I thought, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And then he said, so I want you to go and do it. So I was like, oh, all of a sudden it didn't sound like such a great idea. I mean, we knew one person. There's one Indian student who we'd met in Dharamsala in 76. And luckily, I mean, she was into the Lamas. She'd actually came to a Kopan course at the end of 76, the 9th course. And so anyway, so I went off to Delhi and to try and start a center with no money and no students. And, you know, as far as I knew, Lama Yeshe was the only one who wanted a center in Delhi. So, so it was sort of rough going, you know, for a while, and everything was very expensive, and I couldn't find a suitable place that, you know, that was affordable. Anyway, backwards and forwards for a couple of years, and finally we found this place in a suburb of Delhi called Shanti Niketan. I don't know, do you know it, Gayatri? It's near, it's just outside the ring road. There's a ring road around Delhi, and on the inside of the ring road near Shanti Niketan is Chanakapuri, which is a very upmarket, upscale in America, I think, area where a lot of the embassies are and stuff, you know. So we were just across the ring road from there in Shanti Niketan. It was a really beautiful house, and but it was expensive, and we were able to make it as a Dharma center, but also as a guest house, as a way of helping finance the place. And then there's a Western English student called Trisha Donnelly, who was in Delhi, and she agreed to help me. And we had a Western nun there for a while as the SPC. And we started a clothing business. So one of the ways we tried to make money was there are a lot of Western people coming to getting, you know, designing clothes and getting them made in India. And so we started, so one thing, I became an agent for an Australian guy and for an Italian couple who were making clothes. And so, you know, I was this monk, and then I had to go to all these clothing factories looking at women's clothing and measuring and checking the stitching and stuff. It was, you know, a nightmare, but it's what, you know, we had to make money to support this center, and the guest house business wasn't enough. And people weren't making donations. All the, you know, useless Western Dharma students didn't have any money. And the few Indian people who did finish up coming to the center were often retired. They're mostly men, and they were retired civil servants, you know, because everything was taught in English, not Hindi. So, and there was I don't know what you call it, sort of a housing development, or there were buildings for retired government servants that they could rent at subsidized prices, 1 or 2 suburbs away. So some guys used to come from there. They, you know, they were sort of living on fixed income, so they couldn't give us much money either. And then we started a clothing business making clothes out of old saris. So you could buy old saris, beautiful silk and chiffon, and with incredible embroidery, Gyatri knows. And you know, they're 6 or 8 feet long, you know, so you could make 2 or 3. We used to make sari shirts, which were kind of flowing, and the hippies loved them, you know. And then we, with the leftover ends, make little vests with gold embroidery and stuff. And then we'd send them as gift parcels, you know, highly undervalued, and through the post office, and we send them to friends in the West, who then sell them and then send us back the money. So one of the people who in Australia who we sent stuff to, who did quite a good business in the sari shirts, was Adele Hulse. She was the woman who wrote Big Love, Lama Yeshe biography. Anyway, there were a bunch of different people we sent them to. So this Australian guy that I was the agent for, a guy called Jersey Blank, he wanted to see what Hong Kong would be like as a place to do business out of. So he asked me if I'd go to Hong Kong and check out some things that he wanted me to check out. I can't remember what it was now. And so, you know, money was tight, as I said, and I thought I'd pay for the trip by smuggling some silver out of India. Silver was really, in those days, in the 70s, silver was really cheap in India and much more expensive in the West. And gold was much cheaper in the West than it was in India. Gold is very popular in India. And so I thought, well, if I'll take some silver to Hong Kong and then bring some gold back to India, you know, it's not really harming anyone, breaking the law, but, you know, done with bodhicitta. So so I bought about, I think, 10 kilos of silver in Chandi Chowk in Delhi. And I think the guy I bought the silver from must have tipped the customs off, because I think they were waiting for me. So then I got caught. And in those days, they'd often, when you're going out, they'd sometimes check your suitcase to make sure you weren't smuggling out antiquities, or I don't know what they were looking for. Sometimes they were just looking for something they could lay on you, so you'd have to bribe them, and they'd let you go. So I was caught at the airport, and there was a big drama, and so then I got stuck in Tihar jail in Delhi for a few days, and till I managed to get bailed out. And one of the inmates was the serial killer Charles Sabraj, and people sort of shudder sometimes at the thought of Tihar jail. It has a pretty bad reputation, but I was in this beautiful compound with a lot of other Westerners, you know, people who had overstayed their visas, people who'd been busted for drugs, and you know, there were a couple of Indian people. There was one Indian guy. He wrote a book about it later. He was accused of spying for Pakistan, which is about the worst thing you can do in India, and it was a completely put up job. And I actually contacted him a couple of years ago on Facebook. He said he remembered me, but I don't know if he really did. He was in there. I forget his name now, Captain something or other. You know, some of his superiors had actually done the crime, and then they blamed him, so he got put in jail. So, and it was a compound where Indira Gandhi had been. I think Maraji had imprisoned her for a short time in '77, I think it was. So it was, you know, was very open, and it had a big kind of wall around it, and it was isolated from the rest of the prison somehow. So one day this guy breezes in, Asian-looking guy, it's Charles Sabraj. He had his own private compound with his own manservant. So this is what I'm talking about. See, you're in prison, but a way of getting the best cell. So that's what I'm getting to, is not wanting to be reborn in the upper realms, because even if you get a rebirth in the God realm, you're still in cyclic existence, and it's like angling for the best cell in the prison. So what Sabraj had done was he had a lawyer called Rajan Bakshi, who I think himself was later imprisoned, actually for doing spying for Pakistan or something. But he was a smart guy, Rajan Bakshi, and lived in Vasant Vihar. Actually, I finished up getting him as a lawyer. We had a terrible lawyer at first called PK Krishna Rao. He was totally useless. My Delhi memories. And Sabraj had his lawyer smuggle in a tape recorder for him. So then he went to see the superintendent of the prison, and he told he had this plan of how the superintendent could rip the prison off by getting the money that the government provided for buying food for the prison, and buying substandard food, but putting in invoices for better food, and then keeping the difference for himself. So they hatched this plan somehow, and so the superintendent was totally into it, and then so he had him on tape discussing the scheme of how he could rip the prison system off for his own personal benefit. So then he gave the tape to his lawyer, and then the lawyer made a copy, and then he went to see the superintendent and played this tape for him and said, okay, now like I've got this evidence here that you plotting to rip the prison off, and of course you'll go to prison yourself at the end of your career, blah, blah, blah. But, I won't say anything if I can do this. So he got his own compound. He had a young Indian prisoner who became his servant, who cooked his food and did everything for him, and like that. And he had the run of the prison. So he came over. He'd sort of, swan over to where we were, and to visit the Westerners and hang out with, his people, and so I was only in for 3 or 4 days at that time, but he, on one of those days, he came over and said, "Do you play chess?" I said, "Yeah." So he said, "Oh, let's have a game of chess." So we had this. We started playing chess, and he was really, the way he played was really aggressive. He'd slam the pieces down really hard, So just shortly into the game, I said to him, "Charles, where's my typewriter?" He said, "What?" I said, "Where's my typewriter?" He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "You killed a friend of mine who was carrying a typewriter for me." He said, "What? Who?" I said, "Teresa Knowlton." And he said, oh, she was a drug smuggler and a prostitute. And this was how he rationalized murdering a lot of these people. He thought he was doing the world a favor by, this is his rationalization of getting rid of these low lives, that the world would be better without. So, so anyway, I didn't I left it. I pretty much left it at that. And she was on her way to become a nun, so she was neither a drug smuggler nor a prostitute. But yeah, that was. She shouldn't have stayed in Thailand. She should have gone straight on to Nepal. I never got my typewriter. But I got a story. So anyway, as cases can drag on, this dragged on for nearly 2 years, but eventually I got fined 5,000 rupees. And then I appealed and I got 4,000 back. So I finished up costing 1,000 rupees. And of course, I didn't get the silver back either. It was worth a couple of grand, $1,000, I guess. It was enough to cover the airfare. So don't be like Charles and blackmail the jail superintendent into giving you the best cell. You're still in prison. So cyclic existence is like that. Whether in the top cell or the lowest hell, you don't want to be there. So so that's the thing, Trey. So if you get born in the upper realms, it might look nice and comfortable and as a place you wouldn't mind being. But when your karma runs out, even before you get reborn in those lower realms, as the Buddha showed Ananda, even before, as you're dying in the God realms, for example, the gods have these beautiful radiant bodies, and they wear garlands of flowers, and they have beautiful smell and incredible, beautiful looking friends, and just incredibly blissful life. And there's no suffering to be found anywhere. It's just everything is so, the environment and the people, the other gods, everything is so, with beautiful music, everything is so heavenly. And but in the last, as gods start dying, as they eventually do, because they're in cyclic existence, and everybody in cyclic existence dies, the light, the radiant light of their body starts to fade, and they start to smell bad, and the flowers, beautiful garlands of flowers, wither and die. And then they're so horrible that their friends can't even bear to look at them. So their friends all that were so close at one time shun them. And then the worst of all, karmically, not through psychic power, but just karmically, they see where they're about to be reborn in this horrible, suffering, burning hell. So while they can see the beautiful realm that they're leaving, at the same time they can see the hell that they're going to be born into. And they say that it's said that the mental suffering that they go then is even worse than the suffering of the actual being in hell. So so there's that as well. So therefore it's considered better to be a middle capable being, just at least try to escape from cyclic existence altogether to attain liberation. But then from the Mahayana point of view, that's kind of selfish and cruel, because you're only liberating yourself and it's not helping others very much. And in order to attain liberation, you've depended so much on the kindness of others it's considered, from Mahayana point of view, very cruel to turn your back on all these people who've helped you so much, you know, from your teachers and parents on down, to help you attain liberation, and then you just go into this blissful state of nirvana for eons and forget about everybody who helped you, just leave them to their suffering. So that's not the way to go either. The only way to go is to go to the path of the great capable being, you know, the bodhisattva path, the Mahayana path to enlightenment, in order to become a Buddha, in order to enlighten all sentient beings. So that, Trey, did that answer anything?
Yeah, no, that's a great explanation of it. That's in line with too. Also, there's a commentary in Where's My Perfect Teacher where he describes similar to what you're saying, kind of the God realm is like a state of mental blankness. You're not really actively cultivating karma. You're kind of just chilling out there for eons and eons, and then you're not actually creating any positive karma or working towards enlightenment.
No, you're just using it up.
Yeah.
Right. So he didn't mention Charles Sabraj or Tihar Jail?
Unfortunately, no.
No. Okay. Well, you got that as a bonus. So, rich tapestry of life. What we do for the Dharma. Anyway, if you watch Netflix, look out for The Serpent coming soon to a TV near you. My friend Charles. I let him win the game, by the way. You never beat a serial killer at chess. Okay. If you closely examine your own experience, you'll see that happiness and suffering are dependent upon your mind, upon your interpretation of events and circumstances. Happiness and suffering do not come from outside, from others. All of your happiness and all of your suffering are created by you, by your own mind and motivation. You'll experience suffering if you cultivate and indulge in anger, and you will experience happiness if you practice loving kindness, compassion, and patience. Your suffering and happiness are the direct result of the way in which you take care of your own mind in your life on a day-to-day basis. If you closely examine your own experience, it becomes very clear that suffering and happiness are not created by other living beings, not even by a being such as God or Buddha. You are the creator of your own happiness and suffering. So the next section says happiness and suffering are manifestations of emptiness. By recognizing the benefits of suffering, you're able to identify sufferings as good, and this will bring you happiness. But this happiness, you see that? By recognizing the benefits of suffering, you are able to identify sufferings as good, and this will bring you happiness. But this happiness depends entirely upon properly understanding the benefits of problems, and then on that basis, identifying problematic situations as good. It's not a question of will, but of understanding. When you skillfully understand challenging situations in this way, you are then able to realize this situation is not a problem. I am not suffering, I am happy. As with the suffering we previously perceived and believed in, this happiness comes entirely from our own minds. There is not the slightest happiness existing anywhere else. The happiness that appears to exist externally, out there, is empty It exists in dependence upon the nature of the feeling and the thought that labels it. Thus, happiness is a manifestation of emptiness. It's the same with suffering. When you do not realize the benefits of problems, but identify them only as interferences, you turn them into real problems, labeling them with the thought, this is a problem. Your label causes the situation to then appear to you in a certain way. You've called it a problem, so it appears to you as a problem. The status of problem is merely imputed to that particular feeling by the thought that labels it. In reality, even though the problem appears to exist self-sufficiently, as a real problem, to exist from its own side, it is completely empty. Thus, you can see how suffering is also a manifestation of emptiness. Of course, this is not as easy as it might sound, we have a friend who a couple of years ago had fairly routine surgery, but since then something went wrong and has had excruciating pain for every day for 2 years. And, has had other surgeries to try and correct it. Nobody can really diagnose what the situation is. And it's just, her life has become a living nightmare. And, she's not a really committed Dharma student, I'd say, but has a lot of Dharma friends, including Wendy and myself and a lot of other people, who are into Tibetan Buddhism. And, she's had a lot of advice from Lama Zopa Rinpoche and so forth. But it's impossible for her to see this situation as anything but suffering. And when people advise her, try to transform it, this and these teachings that we're looking at now and so forth, it's so, there's so much pain, it's like virtually impossible. It just makes her angry to be told to label it happiness, to label it, to think that she's burning up all this incredible negative karma, So so I don't know how she could transform that particular problem into happiness. It's just, the pain is so severe.
Nick?
Yeah.
So I don't, I mean, I'm not in any, physical ailments to understand what she's going through, but sometimes when difficult situations arise, like for example, if there is a sense of attachment that I sense towards a specific, title or position at work, or attachment, let's just talk about the root affliction of attachment. Sometimes it seems like that sense of attachment is so strong, it doesn't, like it sort of like consumes and takes over the rational part of it, even though you I try to counteract it with spending more time on the teachings and thinking about the exaggeration that's the cause of this attachment. And it just seems so powerful that it feels like I am powerless in overcoming that affliction. I don't know, I feel like this woman is probably like sort of so close to that pain, like it seems to consume her or something. So I guess I'm just wondering, like when you go through, or maybe I should say when I go through something like that, what are some ways to effectively counteract it? Like what are some good antidotes to make me feel not as powerless towards overcoming those emotions and try to be a little bit more in control of the situation?
Well, we're coming to that. Do you have the book? Um, well, let me just skip slightly ahead because I thought we'd come to it today, but we may not. I'll just tell you what Rinpoche says about so happiness, suffering created by the mind, and as manifestations of emptiness. So he goes on a bit more. Then the next chapter is about the shortcomings of anger and desire or attachment. So with respect to desire or attachment, he says, as long as you cling to and follow desire or attachment, there can be no lasting happiness or peace in your heart. Something is always missing. If you examine your mind carefully in any given moment, you'll see that something is missing. This is true all the time. No matter how much you try to enjoy different places, living in a city or on a mountain, going to the beach or to a beautiful park, no matter how much you try to enjoy food, clothing, anything that can be obtained on this earth, there is always a feeling in your heart that something is lacking. No matter how many friends you have or how long you enjoy their company, there is always something missing. All the time, there is something missing in your heart. You are never perfectly happy. So, I remember before I left Australia, I was working the last couple of years in Australia. I moved from Melbourne to Brisbane, and I worked for a year in the hospital there, and during that year, I met a woman, a nurse at the hospital, who, within a few weeks we started living together, and then, and then I met another doctor at the hospital and his wife, and we became good friends with them. And I had friends from Melbourne who'd moved from Melbourne up to Queensland. So I don't know if you know Australian geography. Australia. There's the state of Victoria in the southeast, and above that is New South Wales, and above that is a big, long state of Queensland. It's kind of temperate in the middle and tropical in the north. Has a lot of rainforests and stuff. Queensland. And in the winter, a lot of people who could afford it from Melbourne and Sydney would go to Queensland to the beaches in the winter for a holiday, like people from here go to Florida, And here we have the deep south. In Australia, we have the deep north. So they're kind of the Australian rednecks live in. Sorry if there's any rednecks here. Rednecks in Australia live in Queensland. In fact, my girlfriend's father was a peanut farmer, quintessential redneck. And then a lot of so-called hippies moved sort of this back to the land thing, you know. So a lot of they quite accomplished people. They just dropped out and bought land in Queensland, farms and stuff, and went up there. They grow dope and live off the land, you know. And so it was quite a movement. So a couple of friends of mine from Melbourne had moved about an hour and a bit north of Brisbane, and bought a farm. And he was in the clothing business, but he became a farmer, Farmer Tom, and grew papayas and strawberries and all his own food, and you know, papayas and strawberries and stuff for market, and had quite a successful farm. And we used to go up and hang to his place on the weekends and hang with him. And then so we fairly quickly got the idea, why don't we get our own piece of land? So my girlfriend and I, with this doctor and his wife, Tony and Jill, we bought a piece of land in a town called Millennia, about an hour and a half north of Brisbane. Brisbane is the capital of Queensland, and it's towards the south end of the state. And so then we had our own place. It was beautiful. It was 240 acres. It had about a third of it was cleared. The rest was natural bush, and there was a stream coming into it, the edge of the property, and it became a waterfall. There's this rock pool, and this rock pool then formed a little creek that ran into this huge Olympic pool-sized pond in the middle of the forest. And then it ran out down to the sea. The sea was about 20 miles away, 15, 20 miles away. And it was just like this idyllic place. And the previous owner had run cattle on it. And there was a lot of cow pats everywhere, and all these psychedelic mushrooms grew all over the place, the gold tops and the blue meanies mostly. And so the place was total hippie paradise, you know, and very isolated. And so one weekend I was up there, and the only building on it was an old cow shed, but Tony was very handy with like carpentry and stuff, this doctor friend we bought it with. So he fixed it up and made it quite habitable. So one weekend I was up there, I think I was by myself that weekend. I was lying on my bed, and I had this terrible empty feeling. And I don't know, and I thought, why do I feel so down, you know? I had this beautiful girlfriend. I had this great career in medicine, you know, I was on a track. And, you know, I had these great friends. I had a very supportive family. We had this beautiful farm that we owned, you know, and it was like, everything was perfect. Why didn't I feel like really happy? You know, enough money, everything. So the only conclusion that I could come to was that I hadn't really traveled the world, you know, and I had friends who'd been to England or been here, Bali, been here and there, you know. So I thought that must be it. You know, I haven't traveled. So then I told Marie, you know, I think, why don't we get out of here for a while? So we made this plan to travel the world for 4 years. We had a big 4-year plan to travel the world. And that's eventually how I finished up in Nepal and doing this. So, but, you know, it's true that All the time there's something missing in your heart. You're never perfectly happy. So no matter how perfect the external circumstances seem to be, if you're relying on that for your happiness, you're missing the point. Even in moments of excitement, if you carefully examine your mind, you'll discover the feeling that something is still missing and you're not perfectly content. Watch your mind closely, examine it well. Ask yourself, is this happiness complete or not? Am I still looking for something more? You'll always find that there's still something missing, that you are looking for something more. This is why the Buddha taught that no matter where you live, it is a place of suffering. No matter what enjoyments you have, it's the enjoyment of suffering. No matter what friend you are with, you're also with suffering. No matter what we experience, we're experiencing suffering. As long as you cling to and follow desire, attachment, there can be no satisfaction. You imagine that following desire will bring satisfaction. That's the reason you do it. But although the aim is to gain satisfaction, because following desire is a flawed means of attaining ultimate happiness, the result is only dissatisfaction. This is all it can ever be. You follow desire and you are not satisfied. Again, you follow desire and again, you're not satisfied. Again, you try and again, you're not satisfied. It's like the life story of Elvis Presley. Okay, take this with a grain of salt. I learned about his life when I was in Melbourne once. While eating lunch one day, we watched the story of Elvis on TV. It was very interesting. His whole life story was very effective Dharma teaching. In both his early and later life, he enjoyed much pleasure and excitement with fame and wealth and everything that brings. Then in his final year of life, when he sensed he was soon going to die, he became deeply depressed. The words of the last song he chose to sing were, "I tried and I tried, but I can't get no satisfaction." During his last concert, tears streamed from his eyes as he sang, and the thousands of fans who were watching him and listening to his song also cried. I looked it up. Elvis never sang, "I can't get no satisfaction." As we all know, that's the Rolling Stones. And his last song that he sang in public was "Can't Stop Loving You." What's it called? Anyway, you can look it up. Elvis Costello sang "I Can't Get No Satisfaction" once, but that's the wrong Elvis. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is, despite everything, Elvis couldn't get no satisfaction. If you examine your mind while you're following desire, you'll find, I hate to contradict Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Maybe there's another meaning there, but conventionally, it was the stones. And that riff, da 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 da. That was actually Keith Richards wrote that for brass, but they liked the first take without the brass, just with the guitar. They took a vote and they decided to not add the brass, just to keep it with the guitar, and that's what became the hit, even though Keith wanted brass. If you examine your mind while you're following desire, it's amazing what you learn in these things. You'll find there's always something missing. Actually, following desire in itself is suffering. Following desire in itself is a problem. Suffering is in the very nature of following desire. No matter how much you follow desire, you do not gain satisfaction. You will only find dissatisfaction. In samsara, this dissatisfaction is the source of most suffering. What causes problems and obstacles in life? What causes the many internal and external obstacles to your spiritual practice? What makes you unable to succeed in your Dharma practice? The answer is simple: following desire and not finding satisfaction. So many disasters in so many people's lives come from following desire and not finding satisfaction. If you diligently examine your mind, analyzing and questioning yourself continually, you'll find that as long as you follow desire, there is no real happiness. Something big is always missing. Your life is always empty. In reality, both having the object of your desire and not having it are by nature suffering. Having the object is suffering, not having it is suffering. If you don't examine your mind carefully, you may believe that obtaining an object of desire seems to stop a problem, the problem of not having the particular object you want. If you follow your desire and you get that object, then the problem of not having that object has stopped, but other problems start. When the problem of not having an object of desire is stopped by obtaining the object, we impute pleasure to the change of feeling that arises when we come into contact with the object of desire. With continuing contact between our senses and the object, however, sooner or later, the pleasurable feeling becomes unpleasurable and is seen as an unbearable problem. Buddhism calls impermanent pleasures the suffering of change, while unpleasant and painful experiences are called the suffering of suffering. Until you recognize and label the feeling as a problem, until you identify it as the suffering of suffering, you impute pleasure to the experience of having sense contact with an object you have labeled desirable. Because you've called it pleasure, the feeling appears as pleasure, seeming even to exist as pleasure from its own side. In other words, although the feeling is only labeled pleasure, the pleasure appears to exist inherently. But it is only a question of time before continuous contact between sense and object becomes unbearable. Your mind imputes pleasure to that feeling for a while, but eventually you come to recognize sustained sense contact with it as discomfort, the obvious suffering of suffering. It seems like pleasure turned into suffering, but in reality, it was always suffering. Whenever we encounter any object or situation, one of three types of feelings is experienced, all of which are suffering. If we identify the object or situation as a problem, we will experience a feeling of suffering. If we identify an object or situation as desirable, we will experience a feeling of pleasure. But even this feeling of pleasure, when examined fully, is suffering. Finally, if we encounter an object that is neither desirable nor undesirable, a feeling of indifference will arise, and this too is ultimately suffering. Every encounter with samsara and objects of samsara leads only to suffering. This is because the aggregates themselves, the mind and body, are contaminated by the seeds of past karma and disturbing thoughts. As long as you are bound to samsara by past karma and disturbing thoughts, you'll experience suffering continuously. Every feeling that arises when you meet a sense object, even if it superficially appears pleasurable or neutral, is in its deeper nature suffering. Following desire compounds negative karma, leaving an imprint in your mind that causes you to create more samsaric suffering in the future. Then, in the future, still under the control of past karma and delusions, you again have to experience the pervasive suffering of samsara because of your past actions. Because of following desire in the past, you have to experience the suffering of suffering, as well as suffering of change, the temporary pleasures of samsara. This is the long-term harm of clinging to and following desire. As long as you follow desire, you experience suffering, not only in the present, but you also ensure that you will endlessly experience the sufferings of samsara on into the future. It is important then to realize that even the feeling that arises when you come into contact with an object of desire, which you label pleasure, is only a form of suffering. When you do not analyze the true nature of this feeling, your deluded, hallucinating mind imputes pleasure to that feeling, which is in reality only suffering. Because of your delusions, because of your hallucination, the suffering feeling appears to you as pleasure, and you believe that it really is pleasure. You grasp onto that, and it appears to your hallucinating mind as pure, truly existent happiness. In this way, all suffering comes from your own mind. To attain ultimate and lasting happiness, you must cut off desire at its root. So then Rinpoche talks about how to, about cutting off desire or stopping attachment. When you're experiencing huge mountains of problems that seem impossible to bear, if you are somehow able to identify that you have caused these problems by clinging to and following desire, you will stop following desire, and immediately your mountains of problems will disappear. For example, while you are constantly thinking of how beautiful somebody's body is, you certainly cannot stop desire. As long as you are thinking in this way, trying to stop attachment, to cut off your desire, is exhausting and useless. In fact, it only causes you to develop more attachment. It's impossible to stop desire in this way. By seeing objects of attachment as desirable, as long as we see objects of attachment as desirable, we can't cut off attachment. The thought that exaggerates the beauty of a person cannot stop attachment. The only thought that can stop this kind of attachment is thought. The only thought that can stop this kind of attachment is thought that recognizes the nature of the body as suffering, as impermanent, as an unappealing collection of flesh, bones, blood, and so on. You may feel, I'm the only person in the world who has problems like this, or I have the biggest problem in the world. This bleak, exaggerated view of everything is immediately stopped when you cut off desire. Recognizing that the root of all your problems is following desire, you can stop following desire by relying on the remedy, the Dharma teachings of thought transformation. If you can apply these teachings, immediately you experience tranquility and great satisfaction. Right then, right in the instant you apply the teachings. By seeing the shortcomings of desire, you stop your problems. You cut them off at the root. When you can do that, you'll experience satisfaction and happiness in your daily life, and you will experience liberation. Cutting off desire liberates you. In the ceremony of taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the prayer of refuge in the Dharma says, I go for refuge to the supreme cessation of attachment. The reason that cessation of attachment is particularly mentioned, rather than the cessation of anger or another disturbing thought, is that all sufferings are the result of desire. If you do not renounce desire, your suffering in samsara has no end. It does not matter what others do. If they cease following desire, they will be liberated. And if you stop following desire, you'll be liberated as well. As the Buddha said, if you desire all happiness, abandon all desire. Just exaggerating the beauty of something cannot stop attachment. Similarly, perceiving as problems the harm you receive or the difficulties that arise will never stop suffering. The more you see problems as problems, the more unbearable they will become. It is impossible to stop suffering by thinking in this way. Identifying problems as suffering only makes your suffering more and more unbearable. Instead, leave the mind in its natural, undisturbed state. Don't follow thoughts of this is a problem, that is a problem. Without labeling difficulties as problems, leave your mind in its natural state. In this way, you'll stop seeing miserable conditions as problems. So, Gyatri, where's your problem? Where's your question now? Did that address any of it?
Yeah, I think what's really helpful is what you said in the end, is to not like beat yourself up with, you know, this is a problem. Yes, this is happening. Why am I not handling it again? Why am I losing control? Why am I thinking too much about it? I think to just recognize that and analyze deeper into the situation, and to just like, you know, keep reminding about myself about the nature of impermanence. I think that resonated the most with you know, some recent situations that were very like bizarre but very acute examples of attachment.
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I maybe it's these recent weeks has been just feeling like they were really bad weeks, because I'm, you know, I don't know if I'm just paying attention to these things now as opposed to this is how I used to live until now. It just seems like, oh my God, I feel like I don't have a handle of anything in my mind. And the fact that it keeps happening frequently makes me feel even more dejected, as opposed to recognizing it and handling it in a constructive way.
Well, you know, as he says at the end, try to leave your mind in its natural state. I mean, natural state can be kind of crazy for some of us, but I think that's not what he means. Not means the usual state, but natural state means uh, calm and clear, and you know, I don't know exactly how we get there necessarily, unless we practice meditation and start to recognize what the mind is and how it works, and maybe even do some purification practice, you know.
Well, I was reading this book by His Holiness and Thupten Chodron on the foundations of the Buddhist path, and
Mhm.
I was in the section on handling you know, destructive emotions, and in that, when they specifically talked about attachment, there was one sentence that really sort of struck with me. Was it was that attachment is a very sneaky root affliction. And I felt that was, I don't know, when I read that sentence I was like, this is so true, because there were times when I, you know, realized, okay, I feel like I'm clinging too much into it. Maybe I should maybe just let it be and come back to it. And then before I even realize it again, that clinging has already come back to my mind, because of how sneakily it pervades into, I don't know, my mental stream. And so that makes me now even more nervous about how to keep a watchful eye on, you know, clinging sensations, or, you know, afflictions like that.
Well, you know, there are different. I mean, when you're dealing with attachment, as Rinpoche said here, um, you're attached to something that your mind sees worthy of being attached to. So don't see it like that. See what the object is and try to understand it in its reality. Is it because the function of attachment is to exaggerate the positive aspects, or what you think are positive aspects of the object, whether it's a person or a thing or, or a promotion or whatever it is, don't see it as desirable. See it as neither desirable or undesirable, and kind of let it go, That's one thing. The other is if you understand, if you recognize attachment and the desire for whatever it is, understand that being under the influence of attachment, attachment thinks it's going to get something it wants and that'll be satisfying and pleasurable, whereas we know it won't. And but while we're under the influence of attachment, we're leaving negative imprints, causes of suffering on our consciousness. We're creating negative karma that's going to ripen into one kind of suffering or another, the worst being rebirth in the lower realms. So, it's, so you want to try to cut that attachment off by thinking of its shortcomings. The problem with attachment is that it as you said, it's a very sneaky mind, and one of the functions of attachment is to obscure the shortcomings or the faults of attachment. So it's like a really cunning enemy. But where does it come from? It comes from the wrong conception of the self. So, it's coming from an I, a self-existent I that doesn't exist. So it's actually a complete fantasy attachment, even though it's so strong and kind of rules our life. If we understand its evolution, then the more we understand its evolution, the more we can weaken it. And another, as Rinpoche mentioned, if you're attached to another person or another person's body, then the function of that attachment is to obscure the faults of that body and make it appear more attractive than it actually is. I mean, if that person were really so attractive from their own side, everybody would be attracted to that person. If that person were really attractive, truly attractive, but they're not. Not everybody's attracted to that person, and other people may see that person as horrible and ugly and despise that person. It's the same person. So objects are kind of neutral in the sense of beauty or ugliness. It's the mind that imputes that quality on something that isn't there. So try to see, for example, a person, as it says, just take off the skin. And does a person look so attractive if the skin's taken off? No, obviously not. Unless you're a cannibal, I guess. But so, there are techniques for overcoming attachment, like that, for example. It's not this is there's simple words, but they're really profound teachings, and we need to read them and study them and think about them and meditate on them, and then bring them into our own life and actually practice these techniques, and see what happens. See if they work or not. Okay, I guess that's it for tonight. I'll stop here. Any other questions? I think, if you can get a hold of this book, it's, we can't do much in these evening sessions, but there's always the rest of the week to think about these topics and read around it and so forth. So, and then meditate to, contemplate these teachings and meditate on them and see how they can apply in your own life and actually put them into practice. That's so, the main thing is between the sessions, really, there's so much more time. Okay, so let's just dedicate the merit. We generated bodhicitta motivation at the beginning. And, as I've said before, in fact, I didn't finish what I was saying before. So when we wake up in the morning, after thinking how fortunate I am that I didn't pass away during the night, whereas so many others did, and I could have, no reason why I couldn't have. But I didn't. So now I have another day to live. So the purpose of my life is to lead all sentient beings out of suffering to enlightenment. So I dedicate this day, everything I do, to this day, to that end. So I might have mentioned, did I mention that I have this Namgyalma amulet, the Namgyalma mantra and other powerful mantras. So, I put this on every morning, and that putting it on reminds me to think of what I just said, So we don't have bodhicitta mindfulness. We can't see every tiny action we do. We're not at the stage yet where we can transform every action consciously at the time, motivated with bodhicitta. But if you do kind of a blanket bodhicitta for the whole day, that's better than not doing it. And it does imbue your whole day with that bodhicitta motivation, if you motivate like that first thing in the morning. Of course, the more we can remind ourselves, when we offer our food or, whatever we're doing, if we can also transform individual actions with bodhicitta, so much the better. But at least we should try and set that motivation for the day, that I'm dedicating everything I do today to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. So then I take it off at night because you don't want to lie on top of it or sleep on it. So take it off, hang it up near the head of the bed. And then at that time, remember, to dedicate any positive actions done during the day and do a Vajrasattva purification before going to sleep. and then dedicate the sleep to enlightenment of all sentient beings. That if you're trying to climb to the top of a high mountain, you can't do it all in one go. You need to stop and take a rest here and there. So the rest, even though it looks like you're not doing anything, you're actually, the rest is part of climbing the mountain. Because if you didn't stop to rest, you'd never get to the top. So sleep is, of course, if the less we can sleep, the better, but have to be realistic as to where we are now. So, but we can dedicate our sleep, sleep in order to more powerfully be able to practice tomorrow. If I didn't sleep tonight, I'd be a total wreck tomorrow. So that wouldn't help anybody. So, sleeping is also part of the path for us. Okay, so for this particular session, we generated bodhicitta. We read the holy words of Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So we created a lot of merit. So I think, because of this merit, may I quickly reach enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. May I become a Buddha to enlighten all sentient beings. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carl.
Thanks, Nick.
Sure, thank you.